Everyone, we'll let folks trickle in. We'll get started in a moment. Okay, the numbers coming in have slowed down, so I will get started with some introductions. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. My name is Moya Kirker, and I'll be moderating the session. I'm very excited to welcome Erinn Aspinall, Danya Leebaw, and Emma Molls from the University of Minnesota, and they will be presenting One Person Does Not Make a Service, Evaluating Library Service Offerings and Deciding What to Stop Doing. So before we get started, I'm going to go over some logistical items. So this session is being recorded, and captions are available during the session by clicking that live caption, the live CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Thank you to Javier for providing these. Please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. You can choose to do this anonymously. There will be about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Please use the chat for general comments or technical issues. Shanti will be monitoring the chat for those questions and comments. Shanti will also be adding some links into the chat, as I'm sure you're seeing. One is for collaborative research sharing. So if you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, go ahead and share it with us in Calm's Resources Zotero or in the chat. One of our volunteers will also drop in our code of conduct for you to review. And with all of that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to our presenters.
Right. Hi, everyone. Emma, can you go to the next slide? So welcome, everybody. We are three directors of department heads at the University of Minnesota Libraries, and we're really excited to be here today sharing our experience with all of you as far as taking a look at service offerings and determining we had way too many and things were a mess, and embarking on kind of a formal project to identify what we could stop doing. So before we get started, just modeling after best practice in qualitative and theoretical research to state our positionality to some degree that we can do here as a group. We are all middle managers in a large flagship research university library. We each report to the same associate university librarian, and we each, as I said, lead a department in our library. So we also each bring a lot of other identities that vary among the three of us in terms of our age or our background and more. But we do want to state kind of our work positionality at the outset, because we recognize that what we're talking about today may feel more or less applicable to your own circumstances. So we feel that it's important to acknowledge the context that we're in. And we welcome reflection or comments or feedback in the chat as we're going through our presentation today about what you feel resonates within your own context and what may need to be approached differently where you are. Next slide. So generally, what we plan to do today is provide a little context, some background setting for what we're going to share. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time discussing the project that we embarked on and how we evaluated our service offerings, and then what we did. So as we evaluated and arrived at what we needed to do, how we put that into practice. And we also have a couple of short exercises. It's really just an opportunity for you to reflect and share in the chat, so nothing too fancy, that we're going to pause and incorporate into our time together today. Next slide. So, we've all been traveling through a period of tremendous disruption for libraries. And probably there's more than I can recount here, but just to kind of go over some of it and set the stage. The biggest disruptor, of course, was the COVID pandemic that started in 2020. There were also social uprisings in 2020 on a scale that had never been seen in our lifetimes, followed by a contested and at times violent post-election period, and then continuing years of uncertainty. So things are still not back to normal, and normal itself is probably an illusion. This is our reality. And so on a big scale in our profession, many libraries we know experienced extended closures, challenges meeting the demands of users when our buildings were closed. And then when our buildings reopened to some degree, we faced new questions about keeping our staff safe, and then dealing with equity issues when some staff were called back and some could still work remotely. During this time, there were layoffs, early retirements, a lot of illness and grief and loss all around us. Many of our employees and ourselves were working with small children at home when schools were closed. Um, Budgets were cut largely across the board. So the resources that we provide to our users changed during this time. Librarianship experienced our own version of the Great Resignation. People left the profession and left the field. And the turmoil continues in kind of a new way to this day with a lot of political pressure and a lot of scrutiny on librarians, including anti-DEI legislation that's affecting libraries all over the country, and personal attacks on librarians in the political sphere. So next slide. So that's the broad context that is really important and relevant to what we're talking about today, which is just like we've been in a period of a lot of disruption, and we certainly felt that at the University of Minnesota Libraries. So for example, kind of narrowing our scope to us, in 2020, we also had a new dean of the library. She started the last week of February 2020. We had a retirement incentive offer at the institutional level. We lost, I think, around 30 staff from our overall libraries of less than 300 people. And so you can see here just hundreds of years of experience just rapidly left the libraries during a time when things were already challenging. In 2021, we had a reorganization of our entire library structure, and in 2022, we had lost our entire leadership team before all of our AULs. So we had brand new AULs who began at the same time as a cohort hire. And in 2023, we kind of found ourselves in the aftermath of all of that with a lot of turnover, a need to do extensive hiring, the privilege of doing extensive hiring and realignment. Next slide. So this is just an image. This is where we were before our reorganization, which is relevant to what we're going to talk about today. And then next slide. And this is where we are. So again, we're not sharing this to kind of hone in on the details or the specifics, just to kind of give that visual impact of our organization changed pretty drastically. And today we're going to be focusing on that kind of red circle on the right-hand side of the screen. That is the division in the libraries that the three of us are a part of, where our departments sit, and what we call the research services division. So we'll be focused kind of within that particular frame today. Next slide. And this is just a detailed view of research services to give you a sense of kind of the scope and the scale of what we're talking about, the number of individuals. You don't have to pay attention to the fine print here. Generally, we have all of the subject liaison librarians who do that kind of familiar set of responsibilities: course integrated instruction, research support, collection development. And we also have some other individuals and groups within our division that have lead research projects or special libraries, and also lead some of our research services. Next slide. And this is the same view, but with the stars and circles signaling new hires. Those are the stars in the last 2 years, and the circles indicating next to people's names who moved into new roles. So the purpose of this image is just to show that out of a division of about 70 people, over a third at this moment in time are either pretty new to the library or in a totally new role. Next slide. So we've kind of hammered the point that we have been going through a lot of change, and I would imagine a lot of you have as well. And in the next few slides after this, we're going to articulate some of the specific organizational problems for us that accompanied this change, and then what we kind of did beyond that. But we want to take a minute, 30 seconds to a minute, and just pause and invite all of you to share your reaction to this. What's the change that you've all been going through? Next slide, Emma. Because we know that it wasn't just us. We had our library, our particular set of problems, but maybe as sort of a cathartic and community building experience, if you can bring into the chat. Yeah, what changed for you? What happened in your library in the last few years? And I'll pause for a little bit, give people a chance to share. Yeah, so thank you for sharing. I'm seeing all sorts of really resonant and important comments coming in through the chat with a lot of people who had reorgs, leadership changes, new hires, people leaving, lots of retirements, budget cuts. So I think we were definitely not alone. Next slide. So as we've discussed, today's talk is focused on that research services part of our library, and we're specifically going to focus on the challenges we faced around what had been our formalized suite of services. So this is a view from our website of our current website of our current formal service offerings. So all we mean by this is, in addition to the core liaison work and the day-to-day work that a lot of our staff were engaged in, over the years we had developed and formalized kind of named, articulated service offerings for the campus. Some of these had developed organically as librarians responded to certain needs and kind of brought people in and started marketing a service. Others were very top-down directed initiatives, and that is where we found ourselves. So the leads for these services follow the organization chart, but there's definitely some messiness. Some of these aren't completely owned by us. Some of these, live within different parts of the library. So next slide. So here are the problems, some of the problems, the ones we could think of generally that we needed to solve. So we called a lot of our work output services. There wasn't much in common between them. Some of the service offerings were really large and formal with clear outputs, and others were actually just a single expert that we happened to have on hand. Who we were calling that a service. We also found that we couldn't really define what we meant by service. So that was a challenge that we realized we needed to tackle, and what made that different from other work that we did. Because of the changes that we've talked about, among other reasons, we had just a real mess on our hands as far as staffing. We had a lot of the service leads were gone. In some cases, there was one person where there had been 5 or 6, or no one anymore, actually no one associated with a service that was listed on our website. And we were getting requests from around campus with these services in mind, and we had no one to fulfill them. So they were kind of getting hot potatoed around the organization as we tried to figure out what to do. We wondered, like, why do we even have the services we have? Are they aligned with where we are now? Are they aligned with the mission of the library and the university? And then really, are they aligned with realistically with the resources that we have, meaning our staff, among other things, but especially our staff? And we also were coming into this period after a difficult, tumultuous time, wanting to be much more mindful about work-life balance for our staff than our organization previously had been. With that, I'll hand it over to Erinn.
Thank you, Danya. So I'm Erinn Aspinall, and I work as the Director for the Health Sciences Libraries at the University of Minnesota. And I'm going to be really talking about our project. So our project to define our research services was internally driven, really due to the pressure that we were all feeling with all of the changes that Danya had mentioned. And it was set as a priority at a retreat that was planned by our associate university librarian with all of our research directors, and there are 5 of us. And while we are not being pressured to make these changes from the libraries or university leadership, we were all feeling urgency around this topic. So the 3 of us came together as an appointed task force, and having the smaller working group really allowed us to be more nimble and work more quickly. But at the same time, we knew that we had to be very careful to balance project management, which we refer to as a caring for the tasks involved, with change management, which is really a caring for the people involved in the tasks, in order to lessen the impact of additional change on our colleagues and our organization. And I want to take a moment to share a bit of history. So defining our service has been what I'd like to call an evergreen project at our libraries. And that has been a constant in our conversation around organizational priorities and needs for as long as I can remember. And I personally have been part of similar conversations about defining services on at least 2 prior occasions. However, there was never enough interest or incentive or urgency or whatever it was we needed for that work to gain traction. So I think it's really easy to get into forums like Calm and share everything that worked well and to gloss over the things that were tricky. But I want to share that I was personally rather hesitant and a bit skeptical about this new call to review our service portfolio, because I'd seen how challenging it was to examine our work like this and to make decisions that would impact not only the organization's identity, but also the personal identities of many of our staff who were involved in the work. That said, in this review of services, timing was really a gift for us, because there was readiness for this in leadership and with our staff and with our service owners. And this organizational readiness really helped the 3 of us as project owners move the work forward in a meaningful way that I really had not anticipated. And I'm very happy about that. But we also recognize that organizational readiness was just one element that helped us move this project forward. And it was the change management process was really just as important as the project itself. So in our presentation, we will be sharing several tools that we developed for our work. And we recognize that these tools would not have been as palatable as if they were presented outside of a supportive change process. And because we've tried it before and it didn't work. And in fact, some of the tools that we've used in our project were introduced before and were never really gained any momentum. So I think a lot of the readiness that we were talking about and also creating a process for introducing the work was incredibly helpful. And as I've had a chance to be a participant in the Calm sessions both yesterday and today, I'm just thrilled to hear kind of a consistent theme around centering the people in the work and leading with compassion and care. And I hope that you also see that same theme in our presentation today. With this in mind, I'm sharing the tasks that we are asked to accomplish, and that is to create a clear and shared definition of research services, to apply the definition to identify our research service offerings, to sunset the services that would not continue, to align continuing services with resources, and to provide a structure for assessing current and proposed research services over time. Next slide. Before I step into the details of our process, I want to emphasize that an important piece of our change management work was to make sure that we included, to the best of our ability, everyone who might be impacted by the project. This approach is reflective of Margaret Wheatley's 10 principles for healthy community change, including the first principle: people support what they create. And that's based on the question, are we engaging all those who have a stake in this issue? So according to Wheatley, the only way to create ownership is to involve people in creating the project. She continues by saying, this does not mean that everyone has to be part in absolutely every aspect of the project, but everyone has to touch it. Everyone needs to feel that they have a voice at some point. And the way you do this is to involve people in some aspect of the creation of the work that you would like them to do. So within this framework, we started bringing people into the conversation even before the work started in earnest. This included sharing that defining research services was one of the 3 top priorities for our division for the year. sharing the project with library's leadership, and providing an overview of the project to our division colleagues. Next slide. Within our 5 major milestones, we intentionally incorporated change management touch points in order to involve the people who have a stake in the work. Again, this was our way of centering people in the work, since we are not only considering the tasks to reach our desired outcomes, but how the tasks impacted individuals who are part of the process. So we're going to call out these change management touch points throughout our presentation. Next slide. The process of defining research service was arguably the most important piece of our project, especially as it related to change management, because we really wanted a clear, shared definition so we could be as transparent as we could be about our work and our process. In our project, we invested the most time in crafting a research services definition, particularly because we were asking people to accept more change, and we knew this was a huge ask, given the context of change in which we had all been working for so long. We started crafting our definition, working as a small group, and we used a backwards design approach. So we looked at the elements of our existing services, determined what the commonalities were, and what elements were essential to the service. And then we reverse engineered a definition. So this allowed us to evaluate a list of services and consider which met the threshold for a service and what the common criteria were to meet that threshold. And once we had a draft definition, we incorporated a change management touch point when we shared the draft with our colleagues during a division meeting and invited them into breakout room sessions where they could ask questions and offer suggestions based on the following broad prompts. And those were, what questions do you have about the definition document? What do you think about the service definition? And any other thoughts that they wanted to provide. Next slide. As an additional change management touch point, we then took the feedback and revised the definition. We are very intentional about creating connection between the feedback we received and how it influenced the final definition. We did this by adding comments to the definition document that detailed the feedback we received and how we incorporated or addressed that feedback in the definition. And this feedback now lives with the definition for future reference. Next slide. And then we added another change management touch point as we closed out each of our major milestones. In this case, we are very intentional about communicating this work with the milestones with our colleagues. And we provided an email, and in that email, we linked back to the feedback that we received. It also included the final annotated version of the definition, along with the original draft for comparison. This email also reiterated that we are only looking at formal services within our division and really acknowledged the broader portfolio of work done by our librarians and professional staff to support disciplinary needs. So that includes collection development, teaching, exhibits, and consultations for a few examples. And then we ended with a process report on our milestones and with an invitation to reach out to any of us for questions, ideas, or any comments they had. Next slide. And here is our final definition that we collectively wrote, and I'm going to drop in to chat a link so you can see that a little closer. And 1 second. I hope that works for all of you. Here is our definition. It is a research service is a structured offering provided by the research division that does 3 things. It aligns with the demonstrated campus needs and the strategic priorities. It provides sustainable levels of support to University of Minnesota researchers, and it offers a clearly defined process and product. Next slide. And we're going to dive a little deeper into each of these criteria. So to be considered a research service, the work must align with needs and priorities. And this means that it provides a unique offering that reflects the library's expertise, and that it offers campus-wide support. So it can't just be to a single department or college. Next slide. A research service must also be built upon a sustainable infrastructure. For us, this means that there's an appointed lead or leadership structure, and that structure allows a collaborative and team-based approach. It also requires sufficient expertise and staffing, noting that one person does not make a service. And it requires appropriate and sufficient tools and resources. And again, noting that one tool does not make a service. And I think this is where we found a lot of kind of fuzziness in the work that we were doing as we were defining our services. And so this was really helpful to us to articulate that. Next slide. And then we also wanted to make sure that our research service must have a clear and transparent process and product. And this is demonstrated by having a defined process for outreach, intake, and triage. It also required clearly articulated and scoped steps and outputs, required documented and reusable workflows, and a way to do some sort of regular assessment and reflection over time. Next slide. So we did the hard work of creating our definition. And now we had to do something with it. And that is when we moved into our second milestone, was really applying that definition. And that really meant that we had to decide which services we would keep and which services we would sunset. So in order to do this, we took that definition and we created a rubric to assess our services against the definition. And then we used that definition for decision making. And this also incorporated some change management touch points. So that is the first thing we did was share the decisions that we made with the service owners who were impacted by the decisions for feedback as a first step. And then we also sent, again, another email to our division detailing the decisions, offering a timeline, and drafting a language for consistent communication about these changes. Next slide. And because we did so much upfront work to create a definition, when we went to assess our services against our criteria, the decisions largely made themselves. And we structured this exercise again by creating this rubric with requirements under each criteria. And you can see this here in our image, how we considered each service in alignment with the criteria to determine if the service is aligned with needs, were sustainable, and had a transparent process. So ultimately, we decided to keep our services related to research information management, research data services, publishing, and systematic reviews and evidence synthesis. We also made the hard, but also the easy decision to sunset our funding and grants support, our support for reproducibility, and our digital arts, science, and humanities program. This rubric was really important in our change management work because it provided a somewhat subjective and transparent process to something that could certainly be perceived as objective. And so in doing so, it depersonalized the work a bit, it offered clarity, and it provided the evidence behind our decision making. Next slide. And as we shared these decisions, we first reached out, as I mentioned, to the individuals who were part of the services that we were sunsetting, because we really wanted to give them an opportunity for feedback and input. This is, again, reflective of Margaret Wheatley's change principle, which prompted us to ask, are we really engaging all of those who have a stake in the issue? And then we shared a more lengthy email to our division that detailed things like, again, reiterating the project scope and our work to date. We outlined the summary of the decisions that were made as we applied the definition, which linked to that rubric that added that transparency. We talked about our next steps, provided opportunities for feedback, and did a very small celebration of farewell to the work that we were sunsetting. And as part of our next steps, we highlighted our future work to develop a transparent process for sunsetting those research services and aligning ongoing services with the available resources. I want to note here that our admittedly small celebration of farewell is something that we want to call out, knowing that our work over the last several years really didn't afford us much opportunity or space for acknowledging change and the real loss and grieving that is often coupled with that change. So celebrating the work that is being changed and the accomplishments of the individuals who are part of that work is really another lovely way to involve those who have a stake in the work. Next slide. Okay, so we are moving on to the second exercise of the day, and I'm going to drop in another Z-link, a shortened link here for you to engage in that provides access to our rubric. And we're going to ask you to take this rubric, second, and apply it looking at it through the lens of your own library. So in the next 3 minutes or so, would you please think about one or two services at your library? Go into the rubric and work through those criteria. And we're going to do that, ask you to do that, and then we're going to regroup and share. And there's a few questions here that might prompt some of your thoughts, and those would be what resonated or surprised you in your service analysis? What did this analysis clarify for you? And how might you shape things differently for your own library? So I'm going to go ahead and give you a moment, and we'll see you at about, I guess, probably 2 minutes from now. I wish I had music to play for all of you today as we're waiting. Okay. So for those of you who may have finished early, I'm going to go ahead and put that first question in as your prompt. And that is what resonated or surprised you in your service analysis. And I can tell you what kind of surprised us as we were going through that was that it was easier, way easier than we thought it would be. So once we got that rubric in front of us, I think Danya, Emma, and I were able to go through all of our services within maybe 30 minutes or less, and really come to our decision-making process much more quickly than I anticipated. And that really surprised us, or surprised me, and I think we reflected on it as a group. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you all experienced as you applied the rubric. And feel free to drop that into chat. Mm. Yes, we were in the same situation, Darcy. Many of our service relied on one person. And in most cases, in many of the cases, that one person left the libraries during all the change that we mentioned. Mhm. Workflows and assessment, and we'll talk a little bit about assessment too. I think that's that in our case too. Um, we haven't thought about assessment fully yet, but it's in progress. Yeah. So there's a question about how people of the sunsetted services reacted and how they are getting those services now. So maybe we can bring that back into our Q&A session. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for your input. Please keep on dropping those in. And I'm going to just maybe drop to the last question prompt with us together here to keep track of our time. If there's anything that you would like to share that feels different for your own organization, and we'll just take a minute to do that. I saw a question about what is sufficient resources, and I think that's a very good question to ask. And we didn't define it at that level, but I think that that could be something that looks very different for the service that you're talking about, as well as the organization that you're in. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Please feel free to keep contributing in chat, and I'm going to hand it over to Emma, who is going to share the process we took for sunsetting services and aligning ongoing services with available resources. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Erinn. Hello, everyone. My name is Emma Molls, and I'm the Director of Open Research and Publishing at the University of Minnesota Libraries. Prior to becoming a director, a little over a year ago, I served as the publishing lead here at Minnesota. So talking about services was something I was very much embedded in. Erinn walked us through identifying service offerings as our second milestone. I'm going to pick up with milestone 3, sunsetting services. Erinn touched on a few things from 2 that very much bled over to milestone 3, but I'm going to kind of retouch on some of the key elements. After applying the definition and based on continuous feedback from colleagues in and outside of our division, we identified multiple services that were no longer going to be supported. We created a reusable checklist, which is what this is, a screenshot of that reusable checklist that guided us through the process of sunsetting. Although the checklist was followed, we held more to the spirit of the checklist because for the most part, a number of the services we were sunsetting were already missing their lead staff or the associated staff. So as mentioned before, these services were completely vacant. To highlight a little of what this checklist did include, I'll note that it included logistical steps like getting the mention of our services off of our library's website, a challenge because also what was happening was multiple website redesigns in the background of all of this. It also included steps that required deep communication and consideration for change management across frontline service staff who typically route patrons to these services. So since these services, some of them had been around for quite a while, we had a number of staff who were used to that being a service, and therefore patrons were guided to the service directly rather than coming first to that service as an entry point. Because we were in a position of sunsetting 3 services at the same time, maybe a wild thing to do, we received feedback at a divisional meeting that subject librarians wanted pre-written language that could be used to communicate with researchers when they inquired about ceased services. So I saw a question related to this in the chat. So we created that shared language with our division. We knew based on feedback given at breakout rooms at a divisional meeting that our colleagues at the libraries felt a fair deal of anxiety in saying no to researchers across campus. This pre-written language provided a way to do just that. Sunsetting a service is a large task that requires every bit of attention to change management. Sunsetting 3 services at the same time was a process that could be its own presentation, and that my own reflection, and I know Danya and Erinn's reflection, probably changes on a daily basis of how this experience went. I'm incredibly grateful and thankful that we had intentional time through this process dedicated to sunsetting services. Doing so fast and without a process would have created many more headaches, confusion, and likely anger. Another note I'll just make is that some of the services that we did sunset were duplicated elsewhere on campus and not in the libraries. So that included some challenges of cross-communication outside of the libraries. Our next milestone was to align continuing services with resources. This was a process that hit heavily on multiple areas of change management, from communicating changes, continuous improvement, to a little bit of strategy as well. We developed and put into place a service model template. which I will drop the link into the chat. The service model template was actually a tool first built in 2019, but at the time was not connected to a process with any sort of context. Bringing the slightly revised tool back this past year during a process that's centered around resource allocation resulted in a great success. This template was designed or revised by the three of us, but is a tool for the leaders of the continuing services, which makes it a tool used directly by the stakeholders and in a lot of ways, the primary stakeholders of this process. The template is customizable to each service and does not require any forced conformity in how the service is functioned, while still providing enough shared understanding to tie it back to our original project brief, which was to analyze our current suite of research services. The service model template provided a clear why for the work that we were doing. One thing I also want to note is that in our reorganization, one of the things that our associate university librarian and our dean, and of course, all of us as directors had an eye on was to ensure that we didn't have, to the best of our ability, not have positions that were so split with so many responsibilities. So one of the things that we did within the reorganization with the stars and circles that Danya noted was we had the ability to staff these services in a way that fully folded them into being complete staffed services, unlike previous years where they might have been a quarter of somebody's job. This is just an outline of the sections on the service model template. Again, these are just a screenshot of that service model template, which I shared in the chat. Each service lead and other staff working in the continuing services completed a template. The information needed to complete the template was mostly not new information for the services. So in that way, asking our service leads to complete this didn't feel as big of an ask as it had in 2019 because this information existed somewhere. It wasn't just as concise and comprehensive in one document. So the template really unified what was previously a lot of messy documentation across Google Drive. And it also filled some gaps that were created because of passing time and also staff turnover. Service models were just completed in the past few weeks. So this was deadlines that went through spring. The completed models are a great tool for library staff, all library staff, to understand staffing, resources, and workflows of each service. They actively work against the black boxification that has historically haunted a lot of our specialized research services, like the ones we reviewed for this project. The completed models will be reviewed and updated annually, which allows for us to streamline documentation and care for the services that often live outside of other existing organizational structures like departments or committees, which have their own templates within our organization. The final step of our work was to create an assessment process. When we were going through the rubric, I think almost in every case, one of the unchecked boxes was that there was some sort of assessment or evaluation in place. We knew that wasn't the case for all of our services. Assessment has been varied across research services, in part because services developed at different rates under a variety of circumstances. Currently, within my department, Open Research and Publishing, which houses the leads of 3 ongoing services, we've started to have a larger conversation about program evaluation, and we are running program evaluation process over the summer. This brings together the service model, includes the same engagement and feedback from staff, that same model just at a department level, and is peer-led. This work is scheduled throughout the summer of 2024. As part of that evaluation process, service leads are also reviewing data, which could be workshop attendance, consultation numbers, outputs like data sets reviewed, et cetera. But due to shifting ticketing system over the years, the age of the services, available data looks quite different and is captured really quite differently. The assessment librarian, which is a position created by the reorganization in 2021, will assist with this work to help align the research services with library-wide data needs and reporting. As Erinn noted earlier in the presentation, people support what they create. We hope through our process of defining research services at the University of Minnesota Libraries that we've built support through a process that engaged stakeholders and focused on change management. Our early recognition that one person does not make a service has become a rally cry of sorts to not only avoid single staff services, but as a reminder to involve everyone in processes like this. Finally, and on a personal note, I'm new to management. This is just a little over a year since I've been in this position, and working on this project with Erinn and Danya has been an absolute highlight of my career as a librarian. I've been trying to say that in front of as many people as I can. So thank you, Erinn and Danya. We do have a 1-minute prompt for all of you in the audience as sort of a final activity for us, which is to just put into the chat one takeaway that you had from our session today. We'll give everyone a moment. Great. Thank you so much for your comments already. Please continue those, and I think we are ready to shift into question and answer time.
Yeah, thank you, Erinn, Danya, and Emma for a great presentation. So we're going to go ahead and move to Q&A. So if you don't already have your questions in the Q&A box, that would be great to put it there. I am going to reorder them now by most upvotes, and I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. So the first question is, how do you address stopping changing a service that your staff find their own purpose in? And how do you address concerns that stopping a service does not mean job scarcity? And then there's sort of like a connected question about the impact staff who provide those services, especially if it's sort of the main aspect of their job.
You know, it's such a great question, and I feel like, I don't know what Erinn and Emma think. This was a huge barrier to this work prior to all those disruptions and changes. This actually was probably one of the main impediments to really tackling what was already, before all those changes, a bit of a problematic portfolio that needed some attention. But I think just given the dramatic staffing issues we were facing, I'm trying to think if this came up, because as Emma mentioned as well, I think just now, a lot of the services that we were talking about sunsetting, one of the reasons was because they had already been understaffed or weren't quite rightly aligned anymore. And there was the only people left were like, please take it off the website. I can't do it anymore. That was more than one case that I can think of where the staff were relieved and felt stretched way too thin. So that is, I just want to validate, like, I think that is a real challenge, and one that has to be addressed. It just didn't happen to be the primary challenge this go round for us, given all the other contexts that we were dealing with. I don't know, Emma and Erinn, can you think of a case here where we did have that particular issue? Because in this case, we didn't, but.
No, yeah. Danya, your point of, we heard more from people that said, do not give me that thing because someone else left. That was true in this case.
Yeah, there was tremendous relief on the ones that we did decide to sunset. Some of them were trickier than others. I do want to just jump ahead while I have the floor, like just scanning through the questions, a couple of things I think we can answer pretty straightforwardly. There's several questions, I think, about the impact on other services on campus, or, did we take services down and kind of just not fill in anything. And we did think that through in the sunsetting a service checklist. That was probably a primary concern in that. And in some cases, yes, that was one of the reasons that we stopped offering a service, was because others on campus were also doing it, and that had already been a challenge, like territorial issues and things like that. We also, thought carefully for each one whether we, like for funding and grants, for instance, we really articulated to ourselves that our role here didn't go away completely. It just wasn't a service. So I think that's really important to emphasize, that we still have experts in the libraries on many of the topics that those services were about. We still have digital scholarship experts. We still have librarians who are excellent at finding grant and funding. We still have librarians who are very much experts in reproducibility. But on the other parts of that rubric, it didn't mean that we had an actual service offering. And so part of that, like in the case of funding and grants, we migrated that information to a LibGuide, and kind of made it clear that in the libraries, we hosted the resources in some cases to search for funding. We had librarians who could help with the searching, but we didn't actually go out and look for grants or things like that. So hopefully that addresses some of those questions.
Great. I think that distinction towards the end there about topic versus, or like topic/expertise versus service is really helpful. The next couple of questions are ones I had too, related to users. Were you able to engage users in the input of the service scoping in advance? Or how did they respond? Another sort of related question is, were there folks in the library who insisted on patron input participation, or was it sort of library folks going alone?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Danya, I think I'll answer this from my perspective on DASH, which is our digital arts, sciences, and humanities service. That was a program that was going through, it was in the process of a number of changes. It was coming up on the cusp of having to redefine itself in a pandemic world, in a post-pandemic world. So there were a lot of those pieces that were going to be done that needed to rethink that entire program anyway. That was a program that included a lot of connections and community that were not libraries centric. So it was College of Liberal Arts, it was researchers, it was a lot of people from across campus. There was some there was ongoing engagement with those folks because it was a kind of a co-owned program that lived in the library. So that community was sort of built in. They were about to have a big conversation of what are we doing with this program that needs to change no matter what. So that was one where it was sort of easy to tie in the other users of that. There also, and I think this is important to note too, and I'm sure all of you felt this at your universities, but there was change across the entire university. So the libraries was not the only unit that was touched by the retirement incentive. That was university-wide, by a sort of a reevaluation of how much is in our plate in a post-pandemic or pandemic world. So, I mean, there were other units on campus that were also having, we need to scale back, we need to redefine our scope. So those like inputs, I think, were a little bit easier in that way. We also, because we lost service leads, for some, we actually didn't have a very clear set of who were the users in this case. That was a harder thing to define. It wasn't just faculty members from a certain department. So we had some of that input depending on what the service was. I think for individual subject librarians, and Danya or Erinn, you might have a better perspective on this. Those were probably there were a few very active people that just we had to have a conversation with. I think subject librarians had some of those conversations. I know I had plenty one-on-one conversations with people who were concerned about changes, and it sort of, I don't know, it ended up okay.
Can I add one thing to that, Emma? I think you're spot on. And I want to say, I think there's also, I think, a very healthy kind of shift in our culture about how, what do we own as librarian experts, and where is it our place to be the ones defining our services. And I think that that's kind of the messaging that like I would like to send to my librarians too. Like, you have agency to scope your work and in alignment with your skill sets and what the profession is. Because I think it's very easy to move into those spaces where you are suddenly doing work way out of alignment for what you're trained in doing or your position description. And I think this is a way, maybe a ladder up in the organization to model that ownership of our work in a really meaningful way too. Like, this is our expertise, this is what we're resourced for, and we have agency. While we certainly want to align with with the university and the strategy there, and that's reflected in the definition, that there is some ownership of the work that we can decide upon.
Great. And so I wanted to mention it's at least it's not in the top sort of upvoted questions here, but there has been a thread in the chat about how might this work in a smaller library? And I think folks might benefit from hearing your thoughts on how you might approach this in a smaller library if you have any thoughts.
I was in a small liberal arts college library before I came into this one. It's been a while, it's been about 6 years, but honestly, like in some ways we grappled with the same set of questions of there's value in, I think, in articulating the work we do as a formal service. It resonates with campus. It helps people see what the library is bringing to campus. But behind the scenes, the sustainability of that is challenging. I mean, I would imagine what feels least resonant for what we're talking about, I don't know, is like the one person doesn't make a service, because I think in smaller libraries, that is actually not the case, that often it is one person. And so I think that's fine. Like, I think for us, that became the rallying cry because of all the problems that we were having surrounding the one person making a service when that person left, especially. But I do think that overall impetus to really think about, can this be resourced sustainably, was certainly something we were thinking about even at that small library. And thinking about how can, and maybe how can I bring other people into this, even if it's just a part of their work. I think, as we said, kind of in that positionality statement at the outset, we do have the privilege of having more staff and having, you know, the ability to staff services with more than one person, ideally. But I think that overall theme of, if this person goes on leave, if this person is sick, if this person is, we need to direct their attention elsewhere. You know, how do we bake in that flexibility so that our service, what we tell the campus we can do, is actually something we can do? I don't know if that gets at the challenge, but.
Well, and Danya, I think what you were talking about really kind of connects with some of the other questions that have come up in the chat too, of we were also very lucky in that we got to fill a lot of our vacant positions. So we had a lot of vacancies. We didn't lose those lines. So we were also throughout this doing a lot of hiring. And the questions that we had around hiring are, what are we expecting this new person in this position to do? Right? When we're replacing a social science librarian, we need a new social science librarian. We don't need a new Emma Molls. So like, how are we differentiating between what is actually the role of that position versus what may have been something that someone who was in that position before was doing, and what are we carrying forward? And I think that also helped to kind of color what we wanted to confirm as a service, because we needed to determine, are we going to staff it? Or can we write that out of a position description?
Okay. So we are right on the tail end of time. So I'm wondering if folks can reach out to you all if their questions remain and if they want more information. I believe your emails were on your last slide, and I will address in the chat. I saw some things about, so the session is recorded, so the chat also comes with that recording, so you'll be able to go back and see that. Thank you for putting the email addresses in the chat as well. So just want to, yes, I see all the virtual applause coming in. It's wonderful. And I want to thank Erinn, Danya, Emma for answering those questions and for a really great presentation. So before we close, just want to remind everyone to please fill out the evaluation survey. It helps us as a conference, and I'm sure our presenters would love to hear your feedback as well. It's in Sketch, labeled feedback survey, right above the session description. So once again, thank you all, and we'll see you tomorrow, morning, afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. Take care, everyone.